Okay, anybody else on yet? No.
No.
That's it. Well, that's why I know that Ruben's not here. No, he often doesn't come on the rain. When it rains.
When I say something, I'm not crazy.
Okay. Amen. Amen. Okay. Okay. Ruben, you're going to keep me on track long distance this morning, huh? All right. Okay. All right. No, Mordechai is not computer savvy, unfortunately. He should be, but okay. That's it in the other Gemara. I'm going to start with the learning sponsor. Okay. The year of learning, Isaac and Evelyn Blachor in memory of his sister, Chaya Rachel Bas Isser, friends of Leonie Meiselman, Leah Sabra Bas Chanach Zundel, friends of Mela Skotsky, Moshe Zelig Ben Mordechai, Martin Lippman and family in memory of his wife, Malka Chana Bas. And David Sheffield, in memory of her father, Nehemiah Ben Mordechai Yonah Halevi, Aaron and Mel Halle, in memory of her mother, Malka Rachel Bas Yehuda Leib, Yossi Goldstein, in memory of his father, Moshe Tzvi Ben Dov, Isaac and Etta Novik, in memory of his mother, Miriam Gittel Bas Chanoch Henach, Perry and Jill Meltzer, in memory of his mother, Malka Bas Baruch, and his sister Goldalea Bas David Halevi, Tova and Leo Zimmer, in memory of her mother, Henyat Bat Reb Leo, and her father, Aaron Ben Yosef Mordechai. Be Pizer, in memory of her husband, Rav Yisrael Ben Chaim Ben Dov, Stanley Presser, in memory of his mother, Leah Bas Yehuda, his mother-in-law, Golda Bas Leber, and his wife, Ruchel Mincha Bas Moshe. Rabbi Dr. Yankee and Malki Honig, in memory of his mother, Rabbanit Hensha Ita Bat Chaim Yehuda. David and Sharon Karpel, Rabbi Tzvi and Robin Karpel, in memory of David and Tzvi's father, Zeb Moshe ben Shlomo Yaakov. Carol and Josh Sanborn, in memory of her father, Yehoshua Shia ben Moshe Yehuda HaKohen. Sarah Alpert and family, in memory of her husband, Rav Tzvi Lipa ben Hillel. A week of learning by Sherry and Moshe Gross. in memory of her mother, Miriam Bas Meir. Barbara Gallen, her husband, Avraham Ben Yonat. Harriet Goldman, in memory of her husband, Hillel Ben Gershon. Reed Sabgir, Judy Sabgir, Jonathan Sabgir, in memory of their father, Simcha Ben Chaim Sado. Today is the 5th of February, and we have a day of learning by Wendy and Kate Goldberg, in memory of her father, Shraga Feivel Ben Binyamin, by Sam Levine, in memory of his father, Yechiel Michel Ben Harab Alexander Zishkin, by Charlie Gelfenstein, in memory of his father-in-law, Yechiel Michel Ben Harab Alexander Zishkin. Rita Gruber, in memory of her husband, Yehuda Meir Ben Yisrael HaKohen. Shamas having Aliyah, Kranka Rafia, Velti Yashir, Shama Talia, and the Chol B'nai Israel, good Gebenshtia. Okay. Michael Breben, if you can hear me, make sure you are muted. Okay, there was a little squeaking noise there. Okay, all right. Okay, we are starting this morning on Yud Bet Amud Beis, the Mishnah towards the bottom of Amud Beis. Okay. Right. Just a quick reminder that the previous Mishnayot again still dealt with questionable expressions of the Nazir vow, right? And how could that be determined? Okay, and that that previous Mishnah in particular focused on the fact that there is no such thing as a partial Nazirut vow. It must be, the minimum is still 30 days. Okay, so if we keep that in mind, that concept in mind, that will be helpful. Okay, not exactly for the first Mishnah we're going to do today, but for a further Mishnah, okay, as to what could happen if someone makes a vow of Nazirut, okay, based on a certain circumstance, and then shortly and begins that Nazirut, and then vows for another circumstance a second term of Nazirut. Okay. We'll see. We'll see. But remember, there is no, we've said, there is no such thing per se as really a partial term. Okay, a normal term, a minimum is 30 days. What's the basis of the 30 days? Okay, we saw that based on a darshan of expounding a pasuk that says Kadosh Yihiyeh. Okay, was one suggestion in the Gemara. If you take the what? Thank you, Alan. The gematria of Yihiyeh, you've got 10, 5, 10, 5, which gives you 30. Okay, now whether that's the real basis, we don't know. Okay, or at least I haven't seen anything in the Gemara to tell us otherwise. Okay, but that at least is something that we can relate to, right? Okay. Matnitin. So we're starting, as I said, on Yud Bet Amud Beis, bottom of the Amud with our new Mishnah. Okay, what is the person? How is he expressing his Nazir vow? Okay, and I keep emphasizing that to remind us there's a difference between a regular neder and a Nazir vow, which is a Nazir neder. Okay, here's the case. Hareini Nazir l'ksheyiyeh ben. Okay, the individual makes an expression of Nazirut when they will have and I'm going to translate Bain here as preferably a male child. Okay, now. Okay, so that we're going to get right out. No, sexual profile. Okay, so what happens? Okay, Vinolad lo Bain, and he has a male child born to him, Harei Ze Nazir. As a result, that person has to, it goes into effect and therefore must become a Nazirite for 30 days. If he's expression, but the Mishnah goes on there. However, I'm going to read into the Mishnah, okay? Nolad lo bat. If, however, and when his expression was clearly Bain, and we understand his intent was male child, were it such that it was born to him a girl, tumtum, or a child of questionable sexual identity, va'androgynous, or a child where it may reflect both genders, right? A known, he is not considered to be does not chal. It doesn't go into effect the Nazareth structure. Imamar, second example in our Mishnah. If he were to say, in his expression of Nazir vow, okay, Imamar yellow the Vlad. If he says, when I have a child, okay, afilu nolad lo bat, even if a daughter is born to him, tumtum, or a child of questionable gender. In other words, it's not clear because of, we said, generally skin covering the genitalia, va'androgynous, or it's possible the child may have both, right? Harei Ze Nazir. In that case, that vow does go into effect. Okay. Yes, Alan. Okay, very good question. I'm not going to answer it just now because I want to use that for a little piece of Gemara a little bit later. Okay? All right, but it's an excellent question. Right? Right? Because we can answer it. We'll deal with it with the forthcoming Gemara. Okay? At the top of our Amud for today in a moment. Okay? But there's another element of that we'll have to do. Okay? So right now, the second example in our Mishnah is clear that if he simply expressed it as a Nazir vow on the birth of a child, okay, that is the case, right? It goes into effect. Okay, now we go on to the top of Yud Gimel Amud Aleph, and we're going to see the following. Okay, Hipila Ishto. Okay, if the situation was that his wife miscarries, and we do not know whether that Vlad, okay, was a Ben or Bas Kaima. We don't know if it was a viable child because we don't know for sure whether it died at childbirth or whether it existed for 30 days, which would then can make it be a valid Vlad, a valid child, or not. We don't know if it lived after 30 days. Okay? A no Nazir, right? A no Nazir. Okay? We don't know. Okay? We would not, but what happens?
You have to wait to see if it's going to be viable.
Okay, we'll have to see. Okay? Now, 13A1 number 3, if you're using Art Scroll, has an extensive note. Circle it or whatever. Make sure you look it over at another point. Okay, what happens? Rabbi Shimon is going to present a different view from Tana Kama. Okay, Rabbi Shimon says as follows. Okay, maybe because there's a doubt here as to whether the infant was viable or not. Okay, he is a suffix. And according to Rabbi, we're going to see he is more stringent in regards to a suffix Nazir than what I'll put in quotes for the moment, a normal Nazir. Okay? So Rabbi Shimon is arguing as follows. Yomar im haya ben kaima. One might say that if it would have been a viable child, right? Hare ani. Okay. So what happens if he's a Safek Nazir? How can he get out of that status? So Rabbi Shimon makes the following suggestion. He could say as the following, the father, right? If he's not sure if it's right, all right, and problematic, okay, why is it a problem? Art Scroll in that note tells us there's two issues. Number one, a Nazir, okay, supposed to shave his head. And if it's a safek, if it's a doubt, he's not supposed to cut the corner of his hair. Secondly, even more significant, the Nazir is supposed to bring a chatas, or right? Can he bring a chatas if he's a safek? No. Okay, so those are the part of two issues that Rabbi Shimon is concerned about. So he suggests now a statement by which the father or the right should say, namely the following: Hare ani nazir chova. If it were the fact that it would turn out that that infant was viable, then by obligation, I'm already a nazir. V'im lav, and if the child were not viable, hare ani nazir nidava, then I declare myself I volunteer to be a Nazareth. Okay? And so therefore he would not be taking on any additional, because either he could be already or not. Okay? That's Rabbi Shimon's answer. So what happens? Says now our text, right? As follows our Mishnah. Chazra v'yalda. The woman comes back and gives birth. Now, Art Scroll wants to suggest, as Alan's question was raised earlier, what about twins? The first twin turns out does not become viable, but the second twin does. So she gives birth on the same day. Okay, Koren did not present that as the viable shot. Excuse me, the pun, as a viable shot. Okay, did not present that question of twins whatsoever. It simply implied what happens if she gave that she didn't give birth, and then a number of and then somehow during that pregnancy, she had relations and then became pregnant again, and a number of months later gave birth. Okay? Now, the implication would seem to be that in either case, since the vow was made, despite the fact that the first, what I'll call birth, was not viable, when there became this viable birth, whether we go by Art Scroll that said it was twins, or whether we go by Koren who said, no, it was simply a couple months later, once that second birth is viable, the vow of Nazarite goes into effect. Okay? All right.
So one of the suffix is not a.
So in other words, it could, when it was Rabbi Shimon who felt it was a suffix, he gave a response how to remove the doubt.
Right.
But now we're saying, no, it's not a suffix situation, because if it was twins, you clearly are going to see, okay, if one of them is viable right away in Nazir. If it's Koren's explanation where it's not right away the same day, but a few months later, nevertheless, it still goes into effect.
He said a Nazir has to take on.
When it's a birth.
Additional restrictions, what are those?
No, it's not additional. No, Rabbi Shimon was saying there's a way to get out of the suffix status.
No, before you said something. on additional restrictions.
We'll get to that in another Mishnah short. Okay? So what happens? Harei zeh nazir. Once she has a viable birth, as I said, whether it's the twin situation, like Art Scroll suggests, or not, like Purim, nevertheless, that chal, that vow goes into effect. Okay? Now we can move. Rabbi Shimon Omer, again he says, to clarifying, Yomar, the person should say, Im harishon ben kaima, if the first birth is a viable birth, harishon chova v'zo nidava, okay, that the first was, okay, viable, and therefore the vow went into effect then by obligation because of it, right? And the second is voluntary. V'im lav, and if the first is not viable, harishon nidava v'zo chova, the first was voluntary, and the second is on the obligation. Gemara. Okay, so we see a clear difference in the view between Rabbi Shimon and Tanakama.
So saying takes on two
Ultimately,
terms of
ultimately, he could have to take on two. That's why the Mishnah to follow is going to be raising a question based on that concept. What's the Gemara? Hi, my, lememra. According to whom? In other words, this vow of the first ruling, okay, regarding the first teaching, the first example in our Mishnah. What is it trying to tell us? Mishum Seifa, it comes to tell us it was brought to be able to clarify the second example in our Mishnah, namely what? Bat tumtum va'androgonus, that had he simply said Vlad and was born a daughter, a questionable gender or mixed both genders, a no nazir. Okay, in other words, to tell us that part of the first example. But that's obvious. If he said it was going to be a male child and it doesn't fit that category, isn't it obvious that he wouldn't be a Nazir? No, says the Gemara. Mahu detema. What does it want to teach us? Okay, what he implied was when I am rebuilt. In other words, when I do have a successful progeny, a viable progeny, that's when it should go into effect. Kamash malan delo. That's not the case because his vow was expressly for a male child. Okay? All right, now, now we get to the second example, all right, from our Mishnah. Okay, there it said, no matter what the gender is, that he does become the Nazareth. Pshita, that's obvious. Mahu detema, what is it trying to tell? What does it want you to know, to learn? Vlad de mechashev beinei imichay ba'im. Maybe it was trying to tell us that the progeny, that child, must be somebody that's considered significant, okay, an important part of the family. Why? And here I had a problem, to be honest, with Art Scroll's explanation, but it probably was true in the time of Chazal at certain points, namely that the birth of a boy was considered more significant or more status than the birth of a girl. Okay? All right. Nevertheless, okay, what does it tell us? Kamash malan, here too, tells us that is not the case. That in that situation, it's not based on the, so to speak, status of the child in the family, but any child, when that vow was made in that manner, would trigger the Nazareth vow. Okay, let's go on. Now to our new piece. Hipila ishto ve'eno nazir. Were the wife to have had a miscarriage, okay, he would not become a Nazareth. Man katanila. Who is the person that teaches this? Rabbi Yehuda de Karihu. It's Rabbi Yehuda who's associated with the Mishnah that we studied about piles of produce. Okay, that was explained in more detail in 13a2, note number 12 of Art Scroll. But we saw that Mishnah where he raised the question, if somebody makes the vow of a such and so amount of produce in a pile, and then he discovers that the pile is stolen or missing or things like that. His argument was, you act leniently, and therefore there's no Nazirut, okay? Which tells us that Rabbi Shimon tends to argue, what? If there's a doubt, you are stringent. And we've already almost seen that already in Rabbi Shimon's view in our Mishnah, because he had to give statements for the person to make to get out of the Nazirut status. Yes, Bob?
We went for whole Gemara Yevamos, where a child, having a child was a big issue with whether or not there was a Yevama situation or not. Yet we did not do this analysis about what type of child, about that. Is there no connection between the?
That's a good question, Bob. I would only suggest the fact that one was focusing on the manner by which the Yibum scenario was decided, and so therefore it didn't matter per se. Here we're talking about the individual status of the person who makes a clear Nazirite vow based on, okay, a birth situation, okay? So the effect is certainly you have a preference in the Yibum situation where we saw, remember, we went from a situation where while Yibum was initially preferred, ultimately Chalitza became the preference, right? Right? The same way, I'm suggesting we see a flow in the Gemara between Nedarim and here to be able to say, we see that gradually you want okay, so let's go on and now in the following, okay? So he says it was Rabbi Yehuda from that Mishnah that we saw previously, okay, who is more lenient on the whole issue of, okay, of Nadarim. Okay? Rabbi Shimon Omer, so Rabbi Shimon says as follows, Yomar im haya bein kaima, hareini nazir chova. Rabbi Shimon said, when there's the doubt, right, let him say, okay, and there was a second birth, right, assuming we go for the moment with Art Scroll's twins scenario, all right, let him say that that was and if that first child was viable, then it is obligation for me to fulfill Nazirut. V'im lav, and if not, hareini nazir nedava. Okay, then instead that the second child, okay, if it wasn't the first, wasn't Ben Kaima, wasn't viable,
Rabbi,
then now it is.
it's not talking about.
Yeah.
It's not talking about two children. He's saying if the first birth is a ben kayoma, it's
Right.
another chova.
Yes,
If
right.
it's not, then I'm going to be. There's no second child born. But he's
Right.
saying if it's I'm going to be an Nazir Nadava.
I'm going to question that. Okay, what?
This is the first case on top of Yud Gimel.
Yeah.
It says Yomar Ishto Yomar, Rabbi Shimon Omer Yomar, and so forth. So in this, he's right. This is
Okay, so if it comes back to dealing with just whether one child, okay, that's
And he said, Rav Shimon says, he says, if it's a ben kayoma, I'm a Nazir
right,
chova.
right. So
And if it's
that's the
not, then
first-
I'm a.
that's Rabbi Shimon's first suggestion to get out of a suffering, as opposed to
Correct.
the second suggestion. That's what.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
All right, so what happens? So now we got a question. By mine Rabbi Abba Mar Rav Huna. Okay. Hareini Nazir l'ksheyihieli ben. The person expresses that there'll be a Nazareth if he has, again, we're suggesting a male child. Vihipila ishto, and the wife miscarries. Right? Vihifrish korban. And in the meantime, he had already set aside the appropriate offerings. Right? V'chazra v'yalda, and then she gives birth later on again, right? Right. So in other words, this would not be a twin situation. This,
Still says get on the same day.
yeah. Well, that's art school. That's why I said that was
Right.
again. That's why they argued twins. Okay, but the Gemara doesn't say that language. Well, that's why Koren didn't agree with that shot and said no. She just gave birth sometime later. Mahu, what's the status? Aliba Daman, according to whom? Okay, so we can begin to think. Aliba the Rabbi Shimon, if it's according to the view of Rabbi.
Give birth and a month or 2 or 3 later.
Well, we're gonna have to.
Say once the woman is expecting, she cannot become pregnant.
But the Gemara doesn't hold by that.
Isn't that the usual way we always talk?
What if it's 9 months later?
If it's 9 months later,
The Gemara also has situations where they say child can be viable after 6 months or 9 months.
7 months,
7 months and 9 months.
7 months and 9 months, and not
Also have
8.
Situations where she had twins, one of whom was born after 7 months, one was born after 9 months.
Could, but all sorts of things. So let's go with the easy example that Alan is suggesting. Let's say that what happened is she had a miscarriage. She got pregnant fairly quickly again, and then she had a premature birth at 7 months. Okay, so that will satisfy both our sensitivities, aside from what the Gemara feels that it is possible for a woman to get pregnant when she's already pregnant. Because the Gemara, remember, often argues what is the concern that one pregnancy will squash an earlier
The other.
pregnancy with fish. Okay, all right, I remember that. Okay, anyway, yes,
You
Alan.
could argue if the first child was not viable and she gets pregnant 2 years later, the oath he took is still there.
Okay, well, we could argue that.
Maybe.
All right. Well, but that's going to be, of course, Rabbi Shimon's position, right? He's going to argue you made the vow that when you had a viable birth. Okay. All right. So let's go back into the Gemara now.
On this pregnancy.
Okay.
He didn't say that. He said about
He didn't say that. Okay. Aliba Daman, according to him. Aliba the Rabbi Shimon. If it's according to Rabbi Shimon, my Tabayah. What are we trying to learn from this? What's the issue? Ha, Amar Rabbi Shimon. But, I'm going to translate the ha here. But wasn't it Rabbi Shimon who told us, Safek Nazirut lahachmir, that his attitude is generally, you have to be more stringent. Therefore, no matter what the time was when there became if she was miscarried and then had a viable birth, whether it's 7 months or 2 years or whatever. Okay? Rabbi Shimon would say that vow goes into effect, right? But if we were saying it based on Rabbi Yehuda's view, the Amar Safek Nizirut Lahakel, who says that when there's a doubt in question, okay, that we are more lenient. Okay, so therefore, again, we could come back to our statement at the very top of the Amud, where it's not a multiple birth. Okay, right? What happened? What's the situation regarding the fact that the animals were already consecrated? What's the status of those animals? Kadosh or lo kadosh? Are they consecrated or aren't they consecrated? Okay, my nafkamina. So what's the difference? The answer is lagizato v'la'avodbo. Once the animal is consecrated, we know it can't be sheared, it can't be worked. So that would make the difference. Take it.
If the woman so has
There's a case of superfetation where she has pregnancy. You know what the commitment at what point it's made? Does that make a difference?
Doesn't seem to make the difference.
Because
You
you
mean
don't
the
know
ethic-
exactly where along it.
Where, what do you mean when he made the commitment for the vow?
Exactly.
Okay, the assumption may be that he made it before the first pregnancy. Okay, even if that pregnancy is not viable, Rabbi Shimon would say if she becomes pregnant and gives birth any amount of time afterwards, then that goes into effect.
Does it become a nazir if every child is born?
Oh, let's wait and see. We'll get to that in another mission. Okay. All right. Teku. So he said we don't have an answer. Let's go on now. By me name ben Rechume me Abai. And so Rabbi Ben Nechume asked Abai, what about the following case? Hareini Nazir Kashayehe Bain. One makes the expression and vow that they would become a Nazirite if they have a child. V'shama Chavero. And his neighbor, right, his good buddy, says Va'amar Va'alai. And he says, me too. Okay, what happens? Mahu, what's the status there? Idibura mashma. Was it the fact that he meant that the statement of a vow was what kicked off his Me Too statement, and therefore, are we saying then that it applies that when his neighbor gives birth to a son, he also will become a Nazir? Oh, agufe mashma. Or are we talking about him, his own self? That what he was saying was, when I also have a son, then I'll do the same thing and become a Nazir at that point also, just like he did when he had a child. Okay? All right? Right? So okay. Yeah, all right. Im Tselomar, says the Gemara. If you want to say agufe mashma, okay? If you want to say he based it on his own personal situation, Amar, and he says Hareini Nazir li ben. Okay? Then when he says that here's the fact that someone says I'll be a Nazirite when I have a son, V'shamach varo va'amar va'ani, and his neighbor hears, his friend, good buddy, hears and says, me too. Mahu, then what's the situation? Anafshe ka'amar, did he say it in regards to his own case, his own personal self? O dilma hachi ka'amar, or maybe this is what he really meant to say. Rachimna lach kavatech, you are such a good friend to me that I want to emulate you. Okay? And therefore, when you have a son, I'll join you in becoming a Nazir as well. All right? So what happens? Im tirtzelomar, if you want to say, kol ba'anfe, okay, that he did it in front of the person, okay, in his presence, what happens? Kasifa, let's go over. Kasifa le milta. Maybe it's an embarrassing situation. Okay? Amar, and he says, Hareini Nazir, ploni ben. Then he should have said, what about the possibility then? If he says, you know what? When the third guy, okay, our third buddy, right, three musketeers, when the third guy has, when he has a child, okay, then I'll be a Nazir like him, okay? Hareini Nazir l'ksheya ploni ben, v'shema chavero, and the third person heard it, va'amar va'ani, and another one says, me too. Mahu, what's the situation? Mi amrin and shalo b'fanav. Do we say that because it wasn't done in his presence, it doesn't apply? Anafshe amar, and that therefore really only applied what he said meant was his own situation, that when he would ultimately have a child, he would become a Nazareth, just as so-and-so did. Okay? Odilma hachi ka'amarle. or this is what he meant to say to him. Rachim nalei kevatech. You're such a good friend to me that I want to show you my esteem for you, and therefore I will do the same thing that you're doing and become a Nazarite. Says the Gemara, to buy, you need to ask about this, which is almost the same as saying take.
Take.
Because I see the Gemara uses,
We saw Nadarim,
they never say things.
right, they always used to buy. My guess is, and I don't have any clear proof, but a good question. I'm sure somebody has written or discussed this, okay? I think, exactly, that's what I'm going to, I agree with what Marty is suggesting. I think Teku is more Palestinian Aramaic. One should ask the question about it because you don't have a resolve. And Teku is just simply Babylonian view at it, right? As Teku means we come to no resolution.
Teku is a more difficult salvation
Okay,
to the problem.
all right. And,
We don't know.
right, okay,
Yeah, when Mashiach, that's what we always.
right. Tavo, Tishbi Yavo, right, Kushia. What we have to understand, and then we'll jump into the next Mishnah, and it's a good point that you ask, and both answers are valid. We've got to always remember that the Gemara was edited by Ravina and Rav Ashi, okay? But that after they did their work, there was another generation of individuals. Okay, we know there are Tanaim, we know there are Amoraim. There is another generation, okay, called the Sofrim, okay, who were also involved in finishing, what? Okay, were involved in finishing the work of Ravina and Rav Ashi before we get to the Gaonim. And some of these comments were probably, they were the ones who inserted it into the Gemara. Okay, and so it's very possible that we have that difference between the Yerushalmi and the Bavli, or I could even suggest that maybe in Pampadita they would use one form of language, in the Hardeya, or okay, that they would use a different form of language. Okay, we know that there were different Masorah in the different yeshivas, okay, as well. Yes, ma'am.
I have to decide these days. And somebody hears you making these remarks about the, and he says,
Right?
moving forward.
Yeah.
Is
Uh-huh.
it a belief?
Right. Okay. So now let's get to our new Mishnah. All right. And this new Mishnah wants to clarify again that a similar situation. We said, what about Siriatim? Somebody makes a statement expressing Nazirut, and then based on one situation, and then they express another statement of Nazirut. Would we argue that it should be 30 and then 30? Or maybe we should argue, well, you start off the first, let's say term, and then you interrupt for your second term. Okay, I'll bring them later. Okay, and then what happens? And then you go back to fulfill the first term.
You stay at 30 altogether?
No. Okay, let's say the following. Let's take our example from the Mishnah we just had. An individual says, okay, I liked Alan's example, and I'll use that. If I have a son, says the person, I will be a Nazir for 30 days. And it turns out the wife has twins, boy and a girl. Okay. Right. So does he, but what happens if he said, if I have children, if I have a child, I will be a Nazir for 30 days. Now he has two children. And according to even Rabbi Shimon, we just saw, he would have to do
30 and 30.
30 and, yeah, but The question is, does he, once the boy is born, he immediately starts his Nazirut. Okay? Now let's say the girl is born, whatever, 10 minutes, few minutes later. Okay? Now he should start the Nazirut for her. So does he do 30 and then 30? Or does he really do started the first 30 for the boy and must interrupt that and then do the 30 for the girl and then go back and do the rest of the 30 for the boy? Okay?
You have a situation where he went on a trip and he says, already Nazir, he starts his Naziros.
Right.
And then word comes, oh, your wife just had a baby.
That would be another example.
And now he's in the middle of one Naziros when the other.
That would be another example, right, Al?
So he still does 30 and 30.
Let's wait and see. That's going to be the question that the Gemara is trying to understand. Okay, so whatever scenario we want to present is both, in other words, one term of Nazirut and a second term of Nazirut. Do they follow or do they interrupt? Okay, Hareini Nazir, okay, he declares himself a Nazir. I'm going to use Alan's example before going on a trip, okay, or while he's on the trip. And then he hears afterwards, V'nazir k'shehiyeli bein. And then he hears afterwards, while he's on the trip, the wife was pregnant, she gives birth. Okay? Hitchil moneh et shelo. It says our Mishnah, he begins with the first term of Nazirutship that he took on initially, right? Ve'achar kach nolad lo bein. And afterwards, the child was born. Okay, mashlim et shelo. He finishes his first term. V'achar kach moneh et shel bano. And then afterwards starts the second term of 30 days. Okay, for the birth of based on the birth of the child. Right. So that's 30, and then a second 30. So what's our question is going to be? When does he cut his hair? When does he bring his offerings? Okay, I'm not going to answer that yet. All right, let's go on to the Mishnah.
If he were to say, if I become a father, I will become a Nazirite 30 days.
Now we're going to get to that. In other words, you're reversing what the Mishnah said. That's what the next part of the Mishnah is. If he says, Hareini Nazir k'shehiyeli bein, if he makes the Nazirite vow about the child first, okay? All right, what happens then? Vin Nazir. And then he makes a second vow of Naziriteship on his own, okay? Not contingent on the birth, right? Hitchil moneh et shelo, says this case. He starts counting his. V'achar kach nolad lo bein. And later then, the child is born. But remember, his expression was about the child first, right? Maniach et shelo, he puts aside his umoneh et shel bano. He counts what he did for the child. V'achar kach mashlim et shelo. And afterwards, he finishes what he did for his own. So there we would see starting one term, interrupting that term to do a second for the other, and then going back and finishing the first term.
When he does the term for his son, presumably at the end of those 30 days, he cuts his hair.
I don't know.
But we know that if he does that, he has to start.
I don't know.
From the beginning.
We'll
for
see.
the second one.
But that's what the Gemara is concerned about, right?
But if the son is born 2 or 3 months later, he has to start his own first.
It could be that he did started it. We'll see. That, in other words, notice the implication of the Gemara is based on what his expression was. That would be the order of the terms, but it would have different impact as to whether it's 30 then 30, or whether it was X number, then 30, then fill in the finishing the X. Okay?
So So if he says, my son and then me, and the son is born 3 months later, he can't start until he does it for his son first.
No,
No?
no, he would have to still start his own.
His own right away.
Okay.
But he didn't.
But if the child was born during the 30 days,
I understand, but you said that it depends on how he says it.
right, if he
But if he
said the
said it first-
expression, if he said himself first,
No, what if he says the boy first?
then that's the point.
And he
That's,
waits 2 to 3
that's,
months?
no, that's the second statement. But the Gemara is concerned, what happens if when he made the statement about the boy, okay? And then during his 30-day period, okay? Okay, the birth
Okay, he
period.
says the boy, and then
Right.
he says himself. And the
Right.
and the boy
So
is
what
born-
happens?
the
Wait a
boy
second.
is born 3 months later. So according to what you
No,
said.
that's not a problem.
So the boy first and then.
No.
he's
His
first.
still first and then the kid.
So it
could-
doesn't depend on how he says it.
It does. It does if the child is born within the 30 days.
No, let's say he's born 3 months later.
That's separate. That's separate. Let's go on. By Rava, so Rav asks, Amar Hareini Nazir le'achar esrim yom. What happens if he says, I'll be a Nazareth 20 days from now? Ume'achshav me'ayom. And from now, I'll start a term of Nazarethship for 100 days. Okay? Mahu, what's the situation? Kevan dahalin meya. Since he said 100, be'esrim lo shlamim, do we say that with the 20 days he doesn't complete it? Lo chaylin, that they don't go into effect? O dilma, or perhaps kevan deitle gidul se'ar levaso, or might we argue, since ultimately at the end he's going to have the long hair of a Nazareth, chaylin, that it does apply. V'tabayle nizirut mu'etet. So why didn't, so the Gemara asks, so in that case, why did Rava have to give an example of 120? Let him give a shorter term, okay, of less than 100 days, okay? All right, so what happens? Chada, in one case, migo chada, kama baile, okay? That we have a situation where we have one set, okay? And then from there, we go to a single set. Kama baile, let him ask about that. So tomorrow, when we pick up on this Gemara, all right? So if the Gemara is going to say, is it dependent on the term, okay, of how long he vowed or not, okay? But in the situation, let's say, where the father made a Nazareth vow, okay? And then made the vow about the child, Nazareth, okay? And she gave birth during the time that whatever he had vowed, okay? The question is going to be, does he interrupt his Nazarethship for a term based on the birth or not? If he finish that his term, does he have to go back and finish? And then why again, when do you do the offerings and the
It
hair?
can't be more than 30 days, it has to be 30 days.
No, of course, if his own vow, he could vow however a month.
Can't do more than 30 or less than 30.
Can't do less than 30, but he could certainly do more than 30. All right? Okay, everybody have a good day. And hopefully we'll see some at the dinner tonight.
Rabbi, thank you very much.
Okay, Harvey, all right?
I'm good now. Not a problem.
Okay, take
Good.
care.
I'll see you later. Take care.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
So long.